Alara Vance understood the architecture of endurance. It was not a grand cathedral of suffering, but a series of small, load-bearing walls she had erected inside herself over years. Each lie Marcus told, each credit he stole, each casual cruelty he delivered with a charming smile was another brick. She was a fortress of quiet acceptance, and she was beginning to feel the strain on her own foundations. Tonight, the gilded cage of the obsidian Gala was meant to be his triumph. It was, by extension, meant to be her most exquisite humiliation. She stood near a wall of glass that overlooked the sprawling, glittering city. The building itself was her design, a secret she held in her bones. The obsidian tower. From the specific tensile strength of the steel skeleton to the way the curtain wall captured the bruised purple of twilight, it was hers. Every line, every angle, every silent, soaring ambition. On paper, on the awards, in the glossy magazines, it belonged to Marcus Thorne, her boss, her ex, the architect of her slow erasure. Her dress was a deep, quiet emerald, a column of silk she had sewn herself. It was architecturally precise, with seams that followed the lines of her body like thoughtful blueprints. It was elegant, understated, and in the sea of brand-name glitter and performative opulence, it made her feel both invisible and defiant. Marcus had insisted she come. It was not a request. It was a command veiled as a final, sentimental obligation. See what we built, Alara. One last time we. The word was a stone in her throat. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that would smile and nod and feel grateful for the proximity to his glow. That version of her had been decommissioned weeks ago, when she had packed a single bag and walked out of the life he had designed for her, leaving behind only the ghost of her talent in his portfolio. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of money breathing. She watched the reflections in the glass. Ghosts of people laughing, ghosts of waiters offering champagne. Her own ghost, still and watchful. She was tired. It was a deep cellular exhaustion that no amount of sleep could touch. The kind of tired that comes from holding a single, painful position for too long. There you are, his voice, once a comfort, was now an alarm bell. Marcus slid up beside her, a flute of champagne in his hand. His posture a study in practiced relaxation. He was handsome in the way of a predator. Sleek, confident, all teeth and charm. He wore his success like a perfectly tailored suit, and he expected her to admire the fit. "You're hiding," he said, a playful accusation that felt like a probe. "Don't hide, Ellie. Tonight is for you, too." She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the city lights, a tapestry of anonymous lives she suddenly envied. "My name is Alara." The shift in him was immediate. The lazy charm evaporated, leaving behind something cold and hard. He placed his champagne on a passing tray, his movements suddenly sharp. "Don't do this. Not tonight." "Do what?" she asked, her voice even. It was a small miracle, that evenness, a testament to the walls inside her. This Ice Queen routine. You left. Fine. You made your little point. Now it's over. You've had your dramatic gesture." He lowered his voice, leaning closer. His cologne was suffocating. "I have the schematics for the waterfront project on my desk. They're a mess. My guys can't make sense of your foundational work. I need you to come in on Monday and walk them through it." It was so breathtakingly audacious it almost made her laugh. Not a request to come back. Not an apology. A work assignment. He saw her as a malfunctioning piece of company equipment that needed to be brought back online. "No," she said. The word was small, but it was solid. "Piece of granite." "No." He repeated the word as if it were a foreign language he'd never encountered. His smile was gone completely now, replaced by a tight, angry line. "Alara, you have an obligation. A contractual obligation. My contract was with you, Marcus. That relationship is terminated." She finally turned to face him. His face was flushed, a blotchy red creeping up his neck. The handsome mask was slipping. You can't just walk away from 5 years of work. I made you. His voice was rising, and a few heads turned. He noticed and with visible effort reined himself in. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. It was the old move, the anchor of his control. The one that said, "You are mine to move, to hold, to hurt." "Let go of my arm," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "You're going to come back to the office," he hissed, his grip tightening. "You're going to fix the waterfront plans. And you are going to stand by my side tonight and smile. Because you owe me that. Everything you have because of me. The only thing I have because of you," she said, her eyes locked on his, "is a scar on my wrist from when you threw a model of the Harrison building at me. Let go." He looked genuinely shocked. Not because he was sorry, but because he was caught. He had forgotten that incident, archived it away as an unfortunate but necessary outburst. He expected her to have done the same. For a moment his grip faltered. That was when a new voice entered their toxic little bubble. A voice that was not loud, but was heavy. The kind of voice that doesn't ask for attention, but commands it by its very nature. "Let go of her arm, Marcus." The voice was calm. It was not a request. It was a statement of a future event that was about to occur. Alara and Marcus both turned. Standing a few feet away was Damian Sterling. He was the man whose money had built this tower, the quiet sovereign of Sterling Developments, a company that bought and sold skylines the way other men bought and sold cars. He was a myth in the industry, a man rarely seen, whose presence was felt in the tectonic shifts of the market. He was wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to have been spun from shadow and steel. His stillness was absolute. He was not performing. He was not posturing. He simply was. He held a heavy crystal tumbler of what looked like whiskey, the ice clinking softly as he took a slow step forward. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. All the ambient energy in their vicinity seemed to bend toward him, drawn into his gravitational pull. The low hum of the party felt distant. Marcus's hand flew from Alara's arm as if it had been burned. His face, which had been a mask of rage, was now a mess of confusion and panic. He was a regional manager who had just been caught berating an employee by the global CEO. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus stammered, attempting to reassemble his charming facade. It was like watching a man try to put a shattered vase back together with trembling hands. We were just having a private conversation." Damian Sterling's eyes, the color of a winter sea, did not look at Marcus. They were on Alara. He was not looking at her with pity or curiosity. He was looking at her with a quiet, unnerving sense of recognition, as if he were seeing something he had been looking for. "It did not look like a conversation," Damian said, his gaze finally shifting to Marcus. It was a brief, dismissive glance, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. "You're making a scene, and my guests are beginning to notice." He took another slow sip of his whiskey. "Leave." The word hung in the air for a moment, simple and absolute. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. A cascade of calculations flickered across his face. Arguing was suicide. His firm was actively courting a new contract with Sterling Developments, a contract that would make or break his entire year. He was utterly, hopelessly outmatched. The power he wielded over Alara was a flickering candle next to the sun of Damian Sterling's influence. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. My apologies." He shot a venomous, panicked look at Alara, a look that promised retribution, before turning and practically fleeing into the crowd. He was a predator who had just discovered he was, in fact, prey. The silence he left behind was profound. Alara stood frozen, the phantom pressure of Marcus's fingers still burning on her arm. She wrapped her other hand around the spot, a reflexive gesture of self-protection. She felt fragile, exposed, like a blueprint left out in the rain. Damian Sterling did not move closer. He maintained his respectful distance, a quiet guardian in the aftermath of a storm. He finished his whiskey in a single, smooth motion and placed the empty tumbler on a nearby ledge with a soft, definitive clink. The sound seemed to pull her back into the present. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" he asked. His voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. She was startled that he knew her name. To Marcus, she was Ellie. To the world, she was no one. A ghostwriter for buildings. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice huskier than she intended. "Thank you." "He will not bother you again tonight," Damien stated. It was not a promise. It was a fact. He looked past her, out at the city lights. "You did a magnificent job with the tower. The western facade's response to the afternoon sun is poetic." Alara's breath caught in her throat. It was such a specific detail, a nuance she had fought Marcus on for weeks. He had wanted more glass, a cheaper, flashier effect. She had insisted on the custom-fabricated fins that would catch the light in just that way, creating a shifting pattern of gold and bronze. It was her signature, hidden in plain sight. "You know," she whispered, "I make it my business to know who is responsible for the things I build, Miss Vance," he said, his eyes still on the skyline. "Not just the name on the letterhead. I reviewed the preliminary drafts, the early ones, the ones full of life, before they were simplified." He saw her. In that moment he saw all of it. The stolen work, the compromised vision, the quiet, heartbreaking fight to preserve some piece of her art. The validation was so sharp, so sudden, it felt like a physical blow. The fortress inside her trembled. A crack appeared in one of the load-bearing walls. She felt a dangerous, unfamiliar sting behind her eyes. She did not cry. She had not cried in years. "My car is waiting downstairs," he said, finally turning his full attention back to her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a deep, steady calm. "It can take you wherever you need to go. My head of security will give you his number. If Marcus Thorne contacts you in any capacity, you will call that number. It will be handled." He was not offering. He was arranging. The efficiency was both terrifying and deeply comforting. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a simple, heavy, black business card. His name was embossed in stark white. Nothing else. No title, no company. Just Damien Sterling and a single phone number beneath it. "This one is mine," he said, pressing it into her hand. Her fingers were cold. The card felt warm from his body heat. "Call that number if the first one does not suffice." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of conclusion. Then he turned and walked away, melting back into the Gala as seamlessly as he had emerged from it. He did not look back. He did not need to. The encounter was over. The solution was in motion. Alara stood there for a long time, the heavy card a tangible anchor in the swirling chaos of the evening. She looked at his name, Damien Sterling. Then she looked out at the city he commanded, from a tower she had built. A quiet, profound shift was occurring within her. The architecture of her endurance was being dismantled, brick by brick, not by an enemy, but by an ally. And she had no idea what she was supposed to build in its place. The ride home was silent. The car was an extension of the man himself. Dark, quiet, and impeccably designed. It moved through the city with an unhurried grace that defied the chaos of traffic. The head of security, a man named Arthur whose presence was as solid and unobtrusive as a stone wall, had simply appeared at her elbow moments after Damien left, murmuring, "This way, Miss Vance." He had not asked where she was going. He already knew. He opened the door for her and then settled into the passenger seat, a silent sentinel. Alara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. Her apartment, a small, third-floor walk-up she'd secured with the last of her secret savings, was a world away from the opulence of the Gala. It was her sanctuary, her decompression chamber. But tonight, the thought of its empty rooms brought not comfort, but a sharp pang of loneliness. She held Damien Sterling's card in her hand. It felt impossibly heavy. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a key to a world of power she couldn't comprehend, a world where problems like Marcus were not obstacles, but minor inconveniences to be swept aside. The temptation to use it was a physical ache. For 5 years, She had fought her battles alone, in silence. The idea of outsourcing the war was both intoxicating and terrifying. What was the cost of such protection? She had just escaped one man's control. She was not eager to step into another's. But Damien Sterling was not Marcus. Marcus was loud, performative, his power a flimsy stage set. Damien's power was structural. It was in the foundations of the city itself. He did not need to shout. He did not need to grab. He simply was. He had looked at her and seen not a possession or an assistant, but an equal whose work he respected. He had seen her art. When the car pulled up to her modest building, Arthur was out of the car before the engine had fully settled, his hand on her door. He walked her to the front steps. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, professional rumble. He handed her a card identical to the one Damien had given her, but with his name, Arthur Vance. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "My name is Arthur. The number on that card is my direct line. It is never off. Call for any reason. A strange car on the street. A hang-up call. Any reason." "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice small. He gave a curt nod. "Mr. Sterling has a high regard for your work. Good night." He waited until she had unlocked the main door and was safely inside before turning and walking back to the car. It disappeared into the night, leaving her in the sudden, ringing silence of her own life. Inside her apartment, she slid the bolt and leaned against the door, finally allowing herself to tremble. The adrenaline of the confrontation, the shock of the intervention, the disorienting relief of being seen, it all crashed over her at once. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled ink. She thought about his words. The Western facade's response to the afternoon sun is poetic. He had seen the soul in the steel and glass. He had read the story she'd written in the language of light and shadow. Marcus had only ever read the budget. The next few days were a study in suspense. She expected a barrage from Marcus, an avalanche of furious texts, threatening emails, maybe even an unwelcome appearance on her doorstep. But there was nothing, a profound, unnerving silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. It was the sound of a problem being handled. She resisted the urge to call the number on Damien's card. Felt like a test. Could she stand on her own 2 feet even now? She started her job search in earnest, sending her portfolio, the real one, filled with her original designs and conceptual sketches, to small, independent firms. Firms that valued artistry over ego. The rejections were polite but swift. She was an unknown quantity with a 5-year gap in her official resume. A gap filled entirely by Marcus Thorne's name. A week after the gala, the first official letter arrived. It was from a high-powered law firm, informing her that Marcus Thorne was suing her for intellectual property theft and breach of contract, demanding an exorbitant sum in damages. The language was vicious, designed to intimidate, to cripple her before she could even begin to rebuild. He was claiming she had stolen his preliminary concepts for the waterfront project. Her blood ran cold. This was his move. He couldn't force her back, so he would bury her in legal fees until she was bankrupt and broken. He would salt the earth of her career so that nothing could ever grow again. The fortress inside her, the one she had thought was being dismantled, began to hastily reassemble itself. Fear was a familiar mortar. She sat at her small kitchen table, the letter spread out before her like a death sentence, and stared at the 2 black cards, Arthur's and Damien's. This was no longer about a strange car on the street. This was an existential threat. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her phone. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the keypad. Who was she to call this man, this titan of industry, about her messy, pathetic problems? But then she remembered his eyes, the quiet recognition. I make it my business to know who is responsible. She dialed Arthur's number. He answered on the first ring, not with a hello, but with a calm, "Yes, Miss Vance." "Arthur," she started, her voice tight. I've received a letter. A legal threat from Marcus Thorne. There was a pause on the other end, but it was not a pause of surprise. It was the pause of someone listening to information they had already anticipated. I understand. Can you forward a photo of the letter to this number? Yes, of course. Do not worry, Miss Vance, and do not respond to it. Consider it handled. The line went dead. Consider it handled. 2 words that promised to lift a mountain from her shoulders. She sent the photo, her hands still trembling, and then sat in the silence, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a strange, disorienting feeling, to hand her catastrophe over to someone else. It was a surrender, but for the first time it did not feel like a defeat. 2 days later, a sleek, black courier box arrived at her door. It was heavy, bound in leather. Inside, nestled in thick, custom-cut foam, was not a legal document, but a tablet. A single icon glowed on the screen, a stylized S. She touched it. The screen came to life, displaying a single document. It was a contract, not just any contract. It was an offer of employment from Sterling Developments. Not as a junior architect, not as a consultant. As chief design architect for their new flagship project, the Phoenix Initiative. It was a multi-billion-dollar redevelopment of a vast, derelict industrial district, the most ambitious project the city had seen in a century. Her name was at the top, Alara Vance. The salary listed made her dizzy. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning in a lifetime. But that wasn't what made her stop breathing. It was the clauses, full creative control, a dedicated team of her choosing, final sign-off on all structural and aesthetic elements, and, most importantly, a clause that stated her name and her name alone would be listed as the lead architect on all public documents, awards, and historical markers. It was a contract designed not just to hire her, but to vindicate her. At the bottom of the document was a simple, typed note. Miss Vance. The lawsuit has been addressed. The firm representing Marcus Thorne has dropped him as a client, effective this morning. His primary investors have also been advised of the situation. I suspect he will be too preoccupied to trouble you further. This project requires a true architect, not a brand name. It requires a poet. I believe that is you. Let's build something that lasts. There is a car waiting for you downstairs. It will bring you to my office if you wish to discuss.
D.S.
She walked to her window and looked down. The same black sedan was parked at the curb, a quiet, patient vessel waiting to carry her into a new life. She looked back at the contract on the screen, then at the threatening letter from Marcus, now just a flimsy, powerless piece of paper on her table. She was not just being offered a job. She was being offered a sword and a shield. She was being offered a chance to tear down the fortress of endurance and build a cathedral in its place. Cathedral in her own name. She took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath she had taken in 5 years. And for the first time, she did not think about how to survive. She thought about what to build. The Sterling Developments headquarters was not a skyscraper that screamed for attention. It was a low, powerful building of dark stone and bronze, set back from the street behind a minimalist garden of river rocks and Japanese maples. It exuded the kind of power that had no need to announce itself. It was the architectural equivalent of Damien Sterling himself. Alara was met at the entrance not by a receptionist, but by a calm, impeccably dressed man in his late 20s who introduced himself as Julian. Miss Vance, a pleasure. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you. Julian was Damien's assistant, and he moved with a frictionless efficiency that suggested he existed 3 steps ahead of the present moment. He did not lead her to an elevator. He led her through a quiet, art-filled atrium to a set of private glass doors that opened directly into Damien's office. The office was vast, but not intimidating. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the garden. The others were lined with books, not just on architecture and finance, but on philosophy, history, and poetry. A large table, its surface a single, polished slab of black walnut, dominated the center of the room, covered in rolled blueprints and architectural models. It was a workspace, not a showroom. Damien was not sitting behind a desk. He was standing at the table, his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, studying a complex model of a tiered, crystalline structure. He looked up as she entered, and a flicker of something warm passed through his cool, gray eyes. "Miss Vance," he said. "Welcome. Mr. Sterling. Please." Damien, he gestured to the model on the table. A preliminary concept for the central hub of the Phoenix project. "It's missing something." A soul, he looked at her, a direct and challenging gaze. "I was hoping you might help it find one." She walked closer, her eyes tracing the lines of the model. It was technically brilliant, an engineering marvel. But he was right. It was cold. A perfect machine with no ghost in it. She found herself instinctively reaching out, her fingers hovering over a sharp, aggressive angle on the roofline. "The light here," she said, her voice soft, almost speaking to herself. "On the east side. It needs to be captured, not deflected. It should be a welcome, not a warning." He watched her, his expression intent. "Show me." Julian materialized at her elbow with a tray of modeling tools, clay, and drafting paper, as if he had anticipated the exact trajectory of the conversation. Alara hesitated for only a second. Then, the years of suppressed creativity, the pent-up artistic energy, surged forward. She picked up a sculpting tool and a block of soft clay. Her hands, which had trembled holding a legal letter, were now perfectly steady. For the next hour, she did not speak. She worked. She reshaped the harsh roofline, softening the angle, adding a series of cascading louvers that would, she knew, catch the morning sun and pull it down into the building's core. She sketched a new interior layout on the paper, creating a central atrium that spiraled upwards like a nautilus shell, designed to create a sense of organic upward motion. She was not just correcting a model. She was breathing life into it. Damien did not interrupt. He stood back, watching her with an unnerving, focused stillness. He was not watching her as a potential employee. He was watching an artist at work, his expression a mixture of fascination and profound respect. He was seeing the real her, the one who spoke in lines and light, the one Marcus had tried so hard to mute. When she finally stepped back, her hands smudged with clay, the model was transformed. It was no longer just a building. It was a statement. It was hopeful. "There," she said, her voice a little breathless. "That's how it should begin." Damien stepped forward, his eyes roaming over her changes. He reached out and gently touched one of the new louvers she had crafted. "A welcome, not a warning," he murmured, repeating her words. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw a genuine, unguarded smile touch his lips. It changed his entire face, softening the severe lines and warming his cool eyes. "I knew I had the right person." "The contract," she said, her professional composure returning. "It's extremely generous." "It's appropriate," he corrected her gently. "It's a reflection of the value you bring. Value that, until now, has been criminally undervalued." He gestured to the two comfortable leather chairs near the window. "Please sit. There are things we should discuss." As they sat, Julian placed a tray with tea and a plate of delicate pastries between them and then vanished as silently as he had appeared. "The contract is non-negotiable," Damien began. "In your favor. If you find any clause insufficient, we will amend it to your satisfaction. My legal team is at your disposal, not to negotiate against you, but to serve you. They have already dealt with the frivolous suit from Mr. Thorne. That is a closed chapter." "How?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "How did you do it so quickly?" "Marcus Thorne's firm was built on a foundation of sand and debt," Damien explained, his voice devoid of any triumphalism. It was a simple statement of fact. "His primary lender was a bank in which I hold a majority stake. His largest investors are partners in several of my other ventures. I simply made a few calls and shared my concerns about the ethical instability at the top of his organization. I also made it clear that Sterling Developments would not be entering into any new contracts with a firm mired in such litigation. The market did the rest. It was so simple, so ruthless, so utterly devastating. He hadn't just won the battle for her. He had dismantled Marcus's entire war machine with a few quiet phone calls. He had not engaged in a fight. He had simply removed his opponent's ability to participate in the game. It was the contrast between the antagonist's hollow, performed power and the protector's deep, quiet, structural power made manifest. "He will be ruined," Alara said. The words a quiet statement, not a question. "He will face the consequences of his own actions," Damien replied, his gaze steady. "He built a career on your talent. A structure with a stolen foundation is bound to collapse." He paused, taking a sip of his tea. "This is not about him. This is about you. I want to be clear, Miss Vance. Alara, this is not a rescue. This is a recruitment. I am not giving you a job because I feel sorry for you. I am offering you this position because you are the best, and this project deserves the best." She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not feel like a victim. She felt like an asset, a powerful, valuable asset that was finally being correctly appraised. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Damien," she said, testing his name on her tongue. Felt solid. "The last 5 years, I stayed too long because I felt a loyalty to the work, not to the man." "I know," he said softly. "Loyalty and integrity are qualities I value above all others. They are also qualities that are easily exploited." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Here, your loyalty will be to the work and to yourself. My only requirement is that you never compromise your vision. Not for a budget, not for a deadline, and certainly not for me." It was the most liberating thing anyone had ever said to her. He was not offering her a gilded cage. He was offering her a sky to fly in. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense, fulfilling work. Damien gave her an entire floor of the Sterling building to set up her studio, a sun-drenched space with panoramic views of the city. He approved her request to hire 2 of her most trusted former colleagues, junior architects who had also suffered under Marcus's regime, including a fiercely loyal young woman named Maya who had witnessed Marcus's rages firsthand. The relationship between Alara and Damien developed through a series of quiet, respectful interactions. They were not passionate, fiery encounters. They were slow-burn moments of mutual recognition. They would have lunch in her studio, surrounded by sketches and models, discussing the philosophy of public spaces. He would find her working late, lost in a design problem, and would not tell her to go home, but would simply have dinner brought in, sitting in silence as she worked, his presence a comforting, steady anchor. He learned the rhythm of her creativity. He knew she did her best conceptual work in the early morning, so he had a private coffee bar installed in her studio, stocked with the specific single-origin beans she loved. She learned the rhythm of his power. She saw how he commanded loyalty not through fear, but through an unwavering, almost paternal sense of responsibility for his people. He never raised his voice, yet his quietest suggestion was treated as gospel. One evening, she found him on the executive balcony, looking out at the obsidian tower, which glowed against the dark sky. "It's still beautiful," she said, coming to stand beside him. "It is," he agreed. "A beautiful building with a flawed history. We're going to change that." "How?" "The industry awards are next month. They've retroactively opened nominations for last year, due to a clerical error," he said, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "My PR team has submitted a new entry for Architect of the Year, under the correct name this time." Alara felt a jolt, a mixture of terror and elation. "Damien, you can't." "I can," he said simply. "And I have. The truth has a way of coming out, Alara. Sometimes it just needs a little help." Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was a man in freefall. His firm was hemorrhaging clients. His investors had pulled out. The bank had called in his loans. He was forced to sell his flashy penthouse, his sports car, everything. He had gone from a titan of industry to a pariah in a matter of weeks. And in his arrogant, deluded mind, there was only one person to blame. He saw the announcement for the Founders Ball, the most exclusive event of the year, hosted by the Sterling Family Foundation. He knew Damien would be there, and he knew Alara would be at his side. He managed to secure a ticket through a desperate, humiliating plea to a former contact. He had a final, fatal miscalculation in mind. He believed if he could confront them, expose Alara as a fraud in front of Damien's own family and peers, he could create enough chaos to salvage something from the wreckage. He would make Damien see that she was a liability, not an asset. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerously stupid. He did not understand that he was not walking into a party. He was walking into the final, perfectly calibrated gear of a machine designed to crush him. The Founders' Ball was held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, a room that dripped with old money and unapologetic prestige. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a warm, golden light over the city's elite. Alara felt a tremor of her old anxiety as she stood beside Damien, but it was a distant echo now, not a paralyzing roar. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, a custom creation from a designer she had only ever read about in magazines. Damien had commissioned it for her, and when she had first seen it, she'd been speechless. It wasn't just a dress. It was a suit of armor, tailored to make her feel not like she belonged, but like she was the standard by which belonging was measured. "You seem calm," Damien murmured, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. It was a gesture of possession, but not of ownership. It was a gesture that said, "You are with me. You are safe." "I'm with you," she said, and she was surprised by the simple truth of it. They mingled for a while, Damien introducing her not as his date, but as his partner, the architect of the Phoenix Project. He spoke of her talent with a quiet, proprietary pride that sent a wave of warmth through her. The city's most powerful figures, bankers, politicians, philanthropists, looked at her with a newfound respect. They were not looking at an anonymous woman. They were looking at the future of their city's skyline. Then, a chill entered their warm bubble. A woman with a regal, severe beauty and Damien's cool gray eyes was approaching them. She was draped in diamonds that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. This was Beatrice Sterling, Damien's mother, the formidable matriarch of the family, a woman whose opinion could make or break a social career. She gave her son a cursory air kiss before her eyes landed on Alara. She scanned her from head to toe, her expression one of bored, dismissive appraisal. It was a look that could strip paint from a wall. Beatrice's world was a finely curated hierarchy, and she could not place Alara. The dress was exquisite, but the face was unknown. Therefore, she must be insignificant. "Darling," Beatrice said to Damien, her voice carrying a brittle, aristocratic edge, though her eyes remained fixed on Alara. She gave a curt, dismissive wave of her hand in Alara's direction. "Be a dear and fetch me a glass of champagne. The servers seem to be terribly overwhelmed tonight." She turned back to her son. Honestly, the quality of the staff these days. She did not just mistake her for a server. She addressed her as one loudly, publicly. "You look like the help," the words, unspoken, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A small, vicious circle of silence formed around them as the people nearby heard and held their breath, waiting for the explosion. Alara froze. All the newfound confidence, all the safety she had felt, evaporated in an instant. She was back at the Obsidian Gala, pinned by another's contempt. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across her chest. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stood there, the architect of endurance, her walls flying back up at lightning speed. But this time she was not alone. Before she could even form a response, Damien moved. He did not raise his voice. He did not get angry. He did something far more devastating. He took a small step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Alara, a human shield. He turned to his mother, and the warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glacial cold that was terrifying in its stillness. "She is not the help, mother," he said, his voice quiet, yet it cut through the ballroom's murmur like a shard of glass. Every conversation in their vicinity stopped. "She is my future wife." Beatrice's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Damien did not wait for her to recover. He turned his back on her completely, a social execution of the highest order. He faced Alara, his eyes now soft, holding hers. In one smooth, unhurried motion, he reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He retrieved a small, velvet box. And then, in the center of the most exclusive ballroom in the city, in front of his horrified mother and 100 stunned witnesses, Damien Sterling got down on one knee. The gasp from the crowd was a single, collective intake of breath. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a ring. It was not a modern, flashy diamond. It was a vintage piece, a stunning Asher-cut diamond flanked by deep blue sapphires in an intricate platinum setting. It was a ring that carried the weight of history, of dynasty. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice clear and steady, "for her alone and for everyone. You are the most brilliant, resilient, and graceful woman I have ever known. You are the soul I have been searching for. My life was a series of calculations before I met you. You have taught me the language of poetry. I don't want to build another building without you. I don't want to live another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears, hot and unfamiliar, finally breached her walls. They tracked silently down her cheeks. She looked down at this incredible man, this quiet sovereign who had seen her when she was invisible, who had defended her when she was attacked, who was now offering her not just his name, but his entire world. It wasn't a rescue. It was a coronation. And just as she opened her mouth to answer, a new voice, raw and unhinged, tore through the stunned silence. "Her? You're marrying her." Marcus Thorne burst into the circle of onlookers, his face pale and sweaty, his tuxedo rumpled. He looked like a man who had been running for his life and had just reached a dead end. His eyes were wild, darting between Damien on his knee and Alara, his face a mask of incandescent rage and disbelief. "She's nothing," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "She's a thief who worked for me, an assistant. You have an obligation to my company, Sterling, a fiduciary duty. You can't do this." He had arrived, the final, diluted piece of the puzzle, clicking into place exactly as the architect of this moment had intended. Damien did not even flinch. He slowly rose to his feet, taking Alara's hand in his thumb gently wiping away a tear from her cheek. He did not look at Marcus. He did not need to. "Julian," he said calmly. On cue, a massive screen, previously hidden in the ceiling, descended silently behind the orchestra. Julian, standing by a lectern, typed a command into a laptop. Damien finally turned, not just to Marcus, but to the entire room. His voice was no longer quiet. It was filled with a cold, resonant power that filled every corner of the vast ballroom. "Marcus Thorne is correct about one thing," he announced. "I did have a fiduciary duty. A duty to my company to avoid partnering with a fraud." The screen behind him lit up. On one side, a scanned image of one of Alara's early, hand-drawn sketches for the Obsidian Tower appeared. On the other, the final, official blueprint submitted under Marcus's name. The genius of her original concept, and the clumsy, simplified version he had claimed as his own, were laid bare for all to see. "For the past 5 years," Damien continued, his voice like a judge delivering a verdict, "Mr. Thorne has built his reputation on the stolen genius of the woman standing beside me." Another image appeared, the waterfront project. Another, the Harrison building. A dozen more followed, a rapid-fire slideshow of Alara's artistry and Marcus's theft, each comparison more damning than the last. The evidence was irrefutable, overwhelming. It was the complete, systematic vivisection of a man's entire career. "As of yesterday," Damien's voice dropped, becoming lethally precise, "my private equity firm completed its acquisition of Thorne Architecture, which was facing bankruptcy. Its assets, its intellectual property, its debts, they are all mine now. Which means, Mr. Thorne, the designs you claim Miss Vance stole from you now belong to me. And I am officially returning them to their rightful creator." Marcus stared at the screen, his face crumbling. The swagger, the arrogance, the rage. It all dissolved into a pathetic, horrifying dread. He was not just ruined. He was annihilated, erased. His name was now a synonym for fraud. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, no, no." He looked around at the faces of his former colleagues, his investors, the entire world he had tried to conquer. He saw only contempt and disgust. The weight of his public demolition was too much to bear. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees, his body shaking with ragged, heaving sobs. He was a king in a play who had just realized the audience was gone, the theater was on fire, and his crown was made of cardboard. Arthur and another security guard appeared, moving with silent, practiced efficiency. They gently but firmly lifted the weeping man to his feet and escorted him out of the ballroom, his pathetic cries echoing in the stunned silence. The trap had been sprung. The monster was vanquished. In the aftermath, the silence was absolute. Beatrice Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone, her face a mask of horror and humiliation. Her own son had orchestrated this public execution, using her snobbery as the trigger. Damien ignored her. He ignored everyone. He turned back to Alara, his eyes soft and full of a deep, unwavering love. The world had vanished. There was only the two of them, standing in the quiet eye of the hurricane he had created for her. He picked up her left hand, his touch infinitely gentle, and slid the cool, heavy weight of the heirloom ring onto her finger. Fit perfectly. "So," he murmured, a small, private smile playing on his lips. "Is that a yes?" Alara laughed. A real, genuine laugh that came from a place deep inside her that had been silent for years. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes." He did not kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he raised her hand, the one now bearing his family's ring, to the crowd. He held it high, a gesture of triumph and presentation. "Allow me to reintroduce myself," he said, his voice ringing with pride. "I am Damien Sterling, and this is Alara Vance, the architect of the Obsidian Tower, the visionary behind the Phoenix Project, and my partner in all things." The vindication was absolute. It was a cleansing fire. In that moment, she was not the help. She was not an assistant. She was not a victim. She was the woman who had designed the sky, and the man who owned it was honored to stand beside her. Later that night, long after the stunned crowd had morphed into a wave of enthusiastic well-wishers and his mother had made a silent, hasty retreat, they stood on the private balcony of the suite Damien had booked for them. The city glittered below, a sea of diamonds scattered on black velvet. The air was cool and clean. Alara looked down at the ring on her finger, felt solid, real, a permanent anchor in a world that had once felt like shifting sand. For so long, her life had been about enduring, about holding on. Now, a new feeling was taking root, a sense of peace, the kind of quiet that doesn't just settle, but heals. "You planned all of it," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of awe. "Marcus, my name on the award submission. Even your mother." "I did not plan my mother's cruelty," he corrected her softly, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a warm, solid wall at her back. "But I anticipated it. I know her standards. I knew she would not see you correctly. I wanted the world, and her, to see you as I see you. And I wanted to ensure that no one would ever look down on you again." He paused. "As for Marcus, he was a loose thread in the tapestry of your life. I simply pulled it." "You didn't pull it, Damien," she said, leaning back into his embrace, a slow, real smile reaching her eyes. "You unraveled him completely." He was silent for a moment, his breath warm against her hair. "He hurt you. That was a debt that had to be paid in full." She closed her eyes, feeling the profound, steady beat of his heart against her back. The fortress inside her was gone. Not just dismantled, but gone. In its place was a wide-open space, filled with light and possibility. The long, exhausting work of endurance was over. The joyful, terrifying work of living was about to begin. The story did not end with a fairy tale wedding. It began in the quiet moments that followed. It began a few weeks later, in the sun-drenched studio on the top floor of the Sterling building. Alara was at the main drafting table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she made a minute adjustment to the model of the Phoenix Project's Central Plaza. The space was no longer just a building. It was a community, a living ecosystem of parks, art installations, and public arenas, all flowing from her singular, poetic vision. Damien entered the studio, not with the air of a CEO inspecting his investment, but with the comfortable familiarity of a man coming home. He was carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one beside her, exactly where she liked it, without breaking her concentration. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, watching her work. She finally looked up, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. "The city council approved the Green Roof Initiative," she said, a spark of excitement in her voice. "We get the full acreage." "I know," he said, a proud smile in his eyes. "I was there. You were very persuasive." He reached out and gently wiped the smudge from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was intimate, domestic, and more powerful than any grand declaration. "You always are." She leaned into his touch, her heart filled with a calm, steady warmth. This was her future, not a whirlwind romance, but a slow, deliberate partnership. A family built not on obligation or convenience, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared ambition, and the quiet, daily choice to build something beautiful together. He was her protector, yes, but he was also her partner. He had not saved her. He had cleared the path so she could save herself. She looked from his face to the sprawling model, and beyond it, to the city skyline waiting for its next transformation. Her past was a ghost, a story of endurance. Her future was a blueprint, a story of creation. And for the first time, she was holding the pen.